Hello and welcome, Lord of the Rings fans from around the world. We are on episode 3 of Rings of Power, guys. This one is called Adar. Now, if you're true to your lore, this is, of course, another name for Sauron. It's actually father as well in Sindarin Elvish, which is actually one of the first Elvish types of languages. So, father, master, beast, basically. I think it is Sauron, but anyway, this is episode 3, my full breakdown and review. Goes without saying, guys, but this is going to contain huge spoilers for this episode, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, feel free to add this to your watch list and come back at a later time. So let's get into it. It starts off with our friend Arondir, captured by an orc clan, and on the screen now, up here, is what you can see as some of the sort of costumes and orcs that are present in this episode. Absolutely fantastic aesthetics, absolutely amazing CGI work as well. In terms of the orcs, there's some bad CGI in this, but we'll go into that in a second. So the episode starts off with Arondir and his mate. I can't remember what his name is, but they're basically captured by orcs. They're being taken to this camp, and basically they're told to dig. They're building trenches, they're building what looks like a supply line, and they have to dig through the dirt, basically, chop down all the trees, and they're digging sort of tunnels. We then cut to Galadriel and Helbrand, who are now on board this massive ship, this grand, amazing, beautiful ship, carved out of amazing wood, has amazing sort of sails, everything. The ropes look golden, it looks absolutely beautiful. And it's kind of where episode 2 finished, is where we pick off. We carry on directly from episode 2, where Galadriel and Helbrand are sort of floating in the water. They get retrieved by an unknown specimen of a man. I thought it was going to be Círdan the shipwright, but it's not. It actually turns out to be Elendil. So we'll go into that later on, but this is the first episode where we see a lot of Númenor. We see a lot of the High Kings of old, so Elendil and Isildur's in this as well. And there's a huge, huge moment where I absolutely freaked out, and it's to do with a sword. And you guys can probably guess if I'm saying Isildur, Elendil, Númenor, and a sword. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Narsil. And Narsil's in this episode as well, guys. So, all in all, I'm trying not to jump the gun too much. I've just finished watching it. As you can tell, I'm quite pumped, quite excited. But there are some issues with this episode as well, which I will go into. So, we're on this ship with Galadriel, Helbrand. They're talking to the captain, who we later find out is Elendil, and she basically notices a mark on his greaves, and it's kind of like a tree in a circle, a gold clasp, and she notices this mark is also the same mark of Helbrand, and she doesn't know at this point who Helbrand really is, but that's who he says he is. So she speaks to Elendil, and Elendil says, "I'm taking you to my superiors, they'll decide what to do with you." This, that, and the other. And she says, "Where are we going?" And then you get this glancing shot. Elendil basically says, "Look for yourself, we're almost there." Galadriel looks over the port of the ship, and you see this absolutely beautiful, grand city. Kind of looks like Valinor, and you've just got vast towers. There's a beautiful inlet of water going around. Just the architecture in this scene is absolutely beautiful. And it's Númenor. At first, it looks a hell of a lot like the Argonath that you see in the Fellowship of the Ring. Do you know when they're sailing down the Anduin River, just before they get to Amon Hen and the Fellowship breaks? They sail down the river, you got the 3 boats, and you got the Argonath statues stood either side. It looks very much like that, and the river they're sailing down looks like the Anduin. So I thought, is this Númenor? Is this Númenor? I don't know. And then it's confirmed it is Númenor. So you get a grand scaling shot of the city. It's bustling with people. It looks well established. It's beautiful. Landmarks mixed in with statues. It doesn't look industrial in any way, shape, or form. It still looks majestic. It still looks old school. And basically how the elves left it. And then we get a scene where Galadriel's talking to Helbrand about the city. She says, you know, this is the city we took over, and we gave this city to men. As some of the sort of bargains of old when we had relationships with men, not in that sort of way, keep your mind clean, but in terms of they had an alliance basically, and it's gone down centuries, it's been passed through generations, and part of that alliance was that we handed them Numenor. She said it has changed, and she's sort of looking around and saying this has changed a lot since I last saw it, but she does remember it quite well. We then go to a scene where we're in the throne room and Galadriel meets the Queen. I don't think she actually introduces herself. I might have missed it. I don't know. But the Queen just seems a bit off, and she kind of has it to do with Galadriel. They almost have a little bit of a flex-in match. Galadriel says, you know, I'm the daughter of blah, blah, blah. I come from blah, blah, blah. Talks about the High Elves. Talks about being a commander of Gil-galad's army. She's an Noldor elf. Don't fuck with me, basically. And then the Queen sort of says, do you know where you are? You're in Numenor. This is my rules now. And they kind of have a flexing match. Galadriel basically says, and I really like this line, you've got a grand city. This is the city that my kin handed to you. Surely you can spare a few planks of wood just to give me a boat to get off. And I thought that was a really cool line, quite funny. It made me chuckle a little bit. Then the Queen sort of says, you're on your last orders sort of thing. You're outstaying your welcome quite quickly. And it kind of comes to the point where it's about to break and there's about to be a little bit of a bloodbath. And then the guards sort of step a little bit closer, and then Hellbrand steps in, kind of calms the situation down and says, you know, there's a way we can do this, there's a way we can talk. Galadriel gets taken away and it all gets diffused. The only thing I had a problem with in this scene, I thought it was a good scene. The script writing and the lines were quite good. Didn't buy into the Queen too much, didn't really get her agenda. Didn't really care too much for her character either. And bearing in mind this is the first time we see the Queen on screen of Numenor, she didn't give me much of a presence other than she came across like a bit of a dick. So not great in that respect. But also, I didn't like how they portrayed Galadriel. And I'm going to go on a limb and say I don't like how they're portraying Galadriel full stop so far in this series. I know you guys are going to come at me and say it's not, you know, canon, there's stuff in there that's changed. I know, but Galadriel is a sorceress, right? She is someone that casts spells, that does magic, incantations, all that jazz. Why is she in armor? Why has she got a sword? I know that we're coming into this, people saying, oh, it's a woke thing, it's woke culture and all that. I can see why they're saying that, but also I don't know how they're going to blend this into the Galadriel that we eventually see in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. She must go from being hot-headed, making mistakes, being quite out there in what she says, to very calm, very reserved, but also incredibly respected and incredibly powerful. And if they pull it off, I will hold my hands up and say I shouldn't have doubted it, but I've just got a little bit of a reserved feeling on this one, guys. I don't know how they're going to merge the two Galadriels together. The Galadriel of the future that we know from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and the Galadriel that we're currently seeing. I'm not buying into it, but I love the actress. I love how she's acting. I love how she's portraying the character. I just don't like how the character is currently written, is what I'm saying. But I might be wrong. It might change as the episodes go on, as the seasons go on, because as we know, we're going to get more than one season. It's likely that they've signed off on 3 or 4 already, and the budget going into this thing is huge. So it could be a slow burn, it could be a slow build, and there might be a multitude of things that happen between now and the very, very last episode of the very last season. Who knows? There's still plenty of time, so we'll see. But anyway, that's the only issue I had with that scene. It just made Galadriel look quite hot-headed. It made her look a bit reckless, a little bit stupid almost, and not really considering the faults of her kin, her people. And that's not really how I would expect a commander to act either. Just touching on her character and how it is now. I know I just said I had a problem with, you know, how she's going to turn into the Galadriel that we know. But even so, all that aside, if I was brought into the way she is now, this soldier character, this commander, that's not how a commander would act. A commander would not go in hot-headed, flexing, saying, my kin gave you this, you give me some wood, I'm getting out of here no matter what. I get they're trying to show the determination, but I think the lines and the dialogue should have been different. I think she should have shown a little bit of a battle almost between what she knows she should do as a commander, as someone that represents the Noldor, but also what she wants as a person, i.e. getting that ship and getting back to Middle-earth and hunting Sauron. We should have seen a little bit more of a conflict on the screen, and I think I would have been okay with that. But unfortunately, she just went in almost like a hot-headed teenager and just said, give me what I want or I'm going to murder everybody. I'm going to take what I need. Doesn't matter if you help me or not. I will find a way. I will steal a ship and I will get there. And I get it. Again, it's showing the determination. It's showing the reserve of Galadriel and what she can do. But I just didn't like how it was delivered. I think there could have been ways that it could have been handled a lot better. We then go on to the captain. The Queen's having a discussion with the captain. As I said earlier, we find out the captain is actually Elendil. Holy shit. So we're going into Numenor section now. And then Elendil obviously talks about his son. And there's people around that says, oh, you know, I heard his son's just as hot-headed as him. We know who the son is. Isildur, who plays a massive part in Lord of the Rings lore. For those of you that forgot and have been living under a rock and are not hardcore fans, Isildur is the one that cuts the ring off of Sauron's finger in the Fellowship of the Ring with the King's Sword, Narsil. So we're going on to Narsil in a minute, and Andoril and Aragorn and how it all passes down. But Isildur is the one that cuts the ring, and if you remember from the very first scene of the Fellowship of the Ring, we see Elendil and Isildur representing Numenor, the High Kings, and then you've got Gil-galad and Elrond representing the High Elves. So they form an alliance, and the battle is called the Battle of the Last Alliance. It's men and elves versus the forces of Mordor, which is Sauron and his orcs, basically. And that's when Sauron makes an appearance, and he gets whooped. He smashes a few soldiers to pieces, but he gets his ass handed to him. Unfortunately, Gil-galad dies in the process, so does Elendil. But Isildur survives, and he goes in. Elrond survives as well. So the sons survive, or the younger elves that you could argue, and the oldies die off and pass on the torch. But that is who these people are. Elendil is an incredibly powerful man in Lord of the Rings lore. Isildur is as well, but Elendil, you don't fuck with him. He's got some sort of elf smashed DNA in his bloodline, and he's a badass, and you will see that hopefully as the show goes on. So at this point, you only see him as a captain. He's a bit of a seafarer. He doesn't have much of a say because he's currently serving his queen. However, as we know from the Lord of the Rings, even if you've just watched the movies, Elendil ends up as the High King of Numenor. So what I think is going to happen, we will see the fall of Numenor as the show goes on. And if you've stuck with your lore and you know your Lord of the Rings stuff, you've read the books, spoilers, we know that Numenor sinks. It goes underwater. It gets engulfed with water because the Valar get pissed off with how stuff is run. And that's how I think it's going to happen. I think that is what is being alluded to in this episode. We see the Queen. She's not ruling correctly. She's not ruling how she should be. That land was gifted to them by the elves, and the elves are very close to the Valar. They're a bit like that. And the Valar are gods, basically. They oversee everything and everyone. If they don't like something, they're going to cause a natural disaster like a tsunami, like a volcano, something that's going to wipe out and refresh the land. And that's exactly what happens to Numenor. And if you've read the Chronicles of Numenor, the Fall of Numenor, it explains in detail about what happens to the city, how it gets corrupted. And then Elendil and Isildur kind of are the remnants of it, the last line, if you like, before obviously we find out about Aragorn and stuff. So that is sort of all linked in this scene. We just remember, if you're a hardcore fan like myself, you'll remember and know that this is going somewhere. This is a seed that is going to be planted in our minds, and as the episodes and the series go on, we're going to see more and more about Numenor, Elendil and Isildur. They're going to play a massive role in it, and I can't wait to see how it unfolds. We also find out Elendil is actually called, or is known as, He Who Loves the Stars, and also means elf friend. And this is where the Queen sort of pulls him up on it and confronts him and says, are you an elf friend? You know, you just brought back an elf from the sea, like some kind of crabfish, and you're just trying to treat her like she's one of us. She's not. So the Queen's very much old school. She hasn't forgiven the elves. She's stubborn as you like. Whereas Elendil's like, do you know what? The sea brought her to me. It was meant to be. He's very much in tune with nature. He's very much in tune with fate and believing in the gods, basically. And the Queen's not having it. She said, you know, the sea might have brought her to you, but you're the one that's committing treason by going against my belief. And I don't want any elves in the city, basically, and you've gone against me, so fuck you. Here's what happens. She then says to him, it kind of switches a little bit. It's a bit of a weird ending to a scene. It was a very powerful, strong scene, but again, I think the Queen's character let it down massively. She then switches from ready to do him for committing treason to then saying, do you know what? I could use you. You can redeem yourself if you do a certain task. And then we don't know what the task is. And then in comes a little soldier who brings him the blade. The blade that cuts the One Ring, or at least I assume it is. It's got the same hilt, it's got the same sort of scabbard as well, and the design of it looks just like Anduril / Narsil. So I think it is Narsil. I'm willing to go on a limb and say it's Narsil. So he gets handed the sword. As we know, this sword becomes the sword of the king. It's the sword that Sauron absolutely is afraid of. It's one of the very few items in Middle-earth that Sauron is afraid of, and that's the High King's sword, Narsil. So it's Elendil's sword, which is what is handed to him, and then we know that this is what Isildur picks up in the fight, the Battle of the Last Alliance. Sauron stands on it. It gets broken into a few pieces. It's different in the book, but in the movie he stands on it and then he cuts his finger off, and that's what destroys Sauron basically to a degree. It detaches his soul from his body, and then Isildur takes the ring. So as we know, later on down the line, the sword gets reforged by Elrond, and in Return of the King, when Aragorn claims his rightful place as king once again, Elrond reminds him of his lineage. He reforges the sword. It then becomes Anduril, which is called also known as Flame of the West. It's forged by the shards of Narsil. Aragorn takes the sword. It's reforged. It's beautiful. It's one of the most best looking swords I've ever seen in my life. And I'm going off on a tangent now about a bloody sword, but it's just a touching moment for someone that's a huge fan of the franchise, a huge fan of the series. Love the books as well. I was like, yes, Narsil, Anduril. The power that comes from these weapons is absolutely amazing. And I put it up there with one of the best, if not top 3 weapons in the whole lore. So very, very happy. So we saw Narsil. We then go back to Arondir, who's currently working in the trenches / mines. And he's talking to his elf friend. I can't remember his name, but he's talking to him about how he notices that the orcs are essentially wearing raincoats and they're undercover. They've got tents and they're kind of walking around with their hoods up like this. And he kind of says, I think they're afraid of sunlight. I don't think they cope well in direct light. So they try and forge a plan, and they basically say that when they've got the chance, they're going to jump up to the ridge where they're cutting through all the trees. If they can get up to the ridge, they can make a beeline and run out of there. But the way they're going to do it is to try and expose the orcs to the sun, which means they have to piss them off a little bit. They have to cut down their shelter and somehow get those cloaks off of them so they can get them nice and crispy in the sun. So they have a little bit of a plan. They sort of do a little great escape, sort of hatching a plan how they're going to get out of there. And then they overhear that some of the other slaves are talking about a successor to Morgoth. We know that this is Sauron, and this is where the elf friend says that they call him Adar, which is a name, if you're good to your lore and you know your lore, is a name that Sauron is known by in the books and the literature. So Adar is Sauron, and they talk about him and they say, you know, this is who the orcs call him, his name's Adar. And then Arondir sort of remembers what he's been told through his kin, that is another name for Sauron. He comes by many names, but that is who they're talking about. So they're dealing with some big shit right now. They're dealing with some big ass successor who's taken over Morgoth, who was the most evilest guy that's ever walked the earth, literally. And they're in deep shit. So they know they're dealing with more than they can handle, and they know they need to go and get help. So the plan is that they escape, they go back to the Noldor, they speak to Gil-galad, they come back with an army and skilled warriors, archers, all that kind of stuff. And as we know, that the elves are arguably the best warriors in Middle-earth. They're skilled with a bow, they're proficient with any weapons, swords, daggers, blades. So if they can get a good army, they can come back and cleanse the land, get rid of these idiots, basically. And I think Arondir's friend basically says that, you know, we'll cleanse them from the earth like salt and all that kind of stuff. So that's the plan. Escape, get help, come back, carve up some orc meat. So then we jump to what I thought was an incredibly gruesome yet brilliant scene. Probably one of my favourite scenes in the whole episode. A couple of the orcs walk over to Arondir and his mate because they're digging through the trenches and they reach a tree. Now, for those of you that know, and you should know, elves are absolutely majestic creatures. They respect and love everything in nature, especially trees. Because of the light of the trees in Valinor, which was taken by Morgoth, he drained the light out of the trees and the soul out of the trees, which is what gives Valinor, the elves, etc., essence, beauty, purity, truth, love, all that kind of stuff. They resent Morgoth for it, naturally. So one of the things that the elves are quite precious about is trees. They will not cut down any trees. They're quite holistic in that nature. And the orc isn't having it. He's saying, you cut that tree down, you do this, you do that, you scumbag, and all that kind of thing. They have a bit of a back and forth. Arondir's mate, so the elf guy, I can't remember his name, says, I'm not doing it, you know, these trees have been here longer than you have, you scum, and all that kind of stuff. You're disrespecting the land, how dare you? They kind of have a little back and forth. And what follows then is what looks like the orc kind of respecting the elf friend and saying, you've got balls, you know. I like that. And they kind of had it looks like he's showing him mutual respect. And you think, nah, I wasn't buying it for a second, but I thought something's going to happen here. And what the orc kind of says is, you look thirsty. You know, you're passionate about what you're saying. Not in as sophisticated words as that. It kind of says, you know, you've got guts, you've got balls. How about a drink? How about just a little sip of water? You know, calm yourself down. We'll just take a moment. And the elf friend, I don't know why, for 1 second of my mind, he believed anything the orc was saying. You're dealing with orcs, for fuck's sake. But he looked at it and he thought, yeah, I'm pretty thirsty. There's this little bit where the music is really, really sort of high-strung, high-pitched, but also dense, slow, and intense at the same time. And you're kind of thinking, don't drink the water, you fool. Don't drink it. Is it water? It's poison, likely. It's probably grog or something. He's going to be drinking oil mixed with shit. Who knows? But he hands the elf. The elf reluctantly takes it, looks around at his kin, and takes a swig. Realizes that it is water. It's fine. Takes a good gulp of it. Passes it to Arondir. He does the same. And then the orc's kind of like smiling, looking around. Everything's all casual. And I thought something's going to break here. They pass the canister to a third elf. Again, I can't remember his name. He looks like Elrond, but it's not Elrond. And he takes a swig, and all of a sudden the orc grabs his dagger, pulls it from his sheath, and literally just slices the elf's neck as he's drinking the water. He kind of grabs his neck, but it's too late. He's just sliced the jugular, and the elf is dead. Arondir kind of drops to the floor, holds him. No, I can't believe it. His elf friend goes absolutely ballistic, and Arondir realizes the only way to really resolve this, they're outnumbered, they're outmatched. Even though they're more skilled, they are heavily outnumbered, and they can't fight all of them on their own. The elf friend kind of starts a little ruckus, and then Arondir stands up and says, I'll do it. I'll cut the tree down. And then everything sort of breaks up. The elf friend looks as if to say, what are you on about? The orcs look as if to say, didn't expect that. And Arondir takes the axe. He walks up to the tree, puts his hand on the tree, blesses it, or says thank you in Elvish. He says something in Elvish. We don't understand what he's saying. I'm assuming it's, I'm sorry, I'm about to do this, or something along those lines. And then he starts hacking at the tree. The orcs start cheering, you know, carnage. And then he cuts the tree down. We then go back to Elendil, who is talking to Galadriel. And all of a sudden, Galadriel says, you know, you're supposed to be helping me. You said you were going to take me to where I need to go, but you're not doing anything about it. Do you hate the elves as much as the queen tells you to, and all that sort of thing? And then he sort of looks at her and then starts speaking in Elvish. And then they sort of have a conversation in Elvish. She said, I didn't know you knew Elvish. And he said, we're always taught it. All my people know it. So don't assume because one of us that lives here is against you and all that kind of stuff. We're not all like that, is essentially the message we get from the scene. And then he offers to take her to wherever she wants to go and ride there. And she says, ride? And she gets quite excited about riding a horse, but she just likes the idea that he's stuck to his word and they don't have to travel by sea anymore, because Galadriel is not a boat person, apparently, despite having a nice little swan boat in the Fellowship of the Ring. Who knows? But she gets quite excited about the fact that he stuck to his word. It rekindles old sort of bonds and old agreements. So that's the kind of sense we get from the scene. We then cut to Helbrand, who is walking around Numenor trying to make some mates. And he comes across a blacksmith and he basically says, I can make a better sword than you. Give me a job and I'll show you. The blacksmith kind of just palms him off and says, you're not going to work here until you get a mark like mine. And it's basically the mark or sigil of the queen/king. Helbrand kind of gives up then. He walks over to the bar. And there's this weird little bit, I didn't really like this scene, where he's sat there drinking. And there's people of the city, like men, that are sat there drinking, regulars. who give him some shit, basically. They say, do you know what? You've sat here, you've drank our ale, you've ate our food, you've enjoyed the company of our people. What are you going to take next? Our women and all that kind of stuff. Or he says something about like that. And then sort of Hellbrand turned around and said, don't forget your women. And that kind of obviously pisses the guy off. And then all his mates come in. They surround him. It looks like it's about to kick off. And then Hellbrand says, do you know what? Places his hands on him and says, you're right. I've been here. I've taken advantage of your luxuries. I've slept in your beds. I've worn your clothes. You've housed me. You've sheltered me. And I've not really shown you much respect. So do you know what? The next few rounds are on me. And then everyone starts cheering. We fast forward, I assume, a few hours where Hellbrand's having a great time. He's getting pissed. So is everybody else. And everyone's friends. And then the guy kind of leans on Hellbrand and says, you know what? You're not too bad. And, you know, you're great. And thanks for the rounds and all that kind of thing. And he's like, yeah, no worries. And then he kind of leaves like a hero. He walks out of the bar, says, bye, ladies, bye, gents, you know, have a great time. And everyone's like, yeah, see you later. And he sort of goes around the corner, he walks down an alleyway, and then you realise what he's done. He's actually taken the mark of the king, the clasp, off of the main guy that was giving him shit in the beginning. And we think, that's what he's up to. He was after that mark. That's what the blacksmith said he needed to earn before he was able to work there. So he just robbed it, basically. We think he's got away with it, and then all of a sudden, the guy that he's robbed it from comes walking behind, and he said, you know what, you nearly had me fooled, I didn't really notice, but he's had him sussed. He brings a couple of mates, and this is where it gets a little bit crazy. So people have been speaking about the mature rating and the heavy rating that this show has got, and I haven't really seen much of that. However, we get a very intense fight scene where Hellbrand basically says, you know, the guy says, who are you, and all that kind of thing, you piece of shit, get out of here. He punches him. Hellbrand then absolutely loses his shit, headbutts the guy, takes out 2 or 3 of the others, smashes one of them's face into the wall, and then you see this bit where he grabs his forearm, puts it against the wall, and then sort of puts leverage on it, and you see his forearm just snap in half in pure focused glory. And it was gruesome, but I literally sat there, I was eating my food, and I thought, I literally hacked on my food. I was like, fucking hell, what is going on? This is Lord of the Rings. But I like that they're not afraid to go to those deep, dark depths. If it's going to add emphasis to the scene that we're watching, it's going to add emphasis to the character, or what is happening, the intensity, the emotion. If it flares it, and it gives us something to be proud of at the same time, then I'm all for it. As long as it's not needless violence, as long as it's not thrown in there and it just doesn't make sense, and they're just trying to live up to the rating, then no. But it worked really well in this scene. It just shows what Hellbrand is capable of. It shows his tenacity. And then later on, we find out that Hellbrand is actually the king that they talk about has deserted the Southlands. So in essence, there's a king that is part of the Southlands. And the reason why the Southlands is in such dire straits is because the king's abandoned the capital. There's no one ruling it, and they're kind of fighting in sort of militia groups on their own. Galadriel goes away. After Hellbrand gets put in prison, she goes away and finds out with Elendil, through the scrolls and things like that, that the Southlands is Hellbrand's region, his kingdom, if you like, and he is the king of it, and he's the one that's abandoned it that they keep talking about. So she goes back to Hellbrand and says, look, I know who you are. The reason why the Southlands is the way it is because of you. You turned away because, you know, you turned your back on your people. She's trying to rally him up, and he kind of turns around and says, I'm not interested. The reason I walked away is because I'm ashamed of my kin. I'm ashamed of my ancestors and my people, because they are the ones that signed a blood pact with Morgoth, and I don't want to be associated with it. Which is fair enough. It's kind of like Aragorn's story, where he tucks his tail between his legs and he says, don't want it. I don't want to be known as the heir of Isildur, and what Isildur did with the ring is the reason why the ring's still here. It's kind of like Aragorn's story mirrored with Hellbrand. But I really like Hellbrand's character. He's quite bold, he's quite bolshy, he isn't afraid to speak his mind, but he's also got an essence of intelligence about him as well, and history. So let's see where he goes in terms of his character arc. But I like Hellbrand. I'm starting to warm to him quite a bit, and we see a lot in this episode of Hellbrand, and we get to warm to his nature. We get to understand his reasoning in terms of things he's said, but also the choices that he's made, both as a king and as a guy. We then cut to what I feel is still arguably the worst bit of this show, I'm sorry, is the Harfoots. I cannot stand the hobbits in this show. I don't really understand the point of them, other than I know they're shepherding the Meteor Man, the stranger, the guy that fell from the sky, who we still don't know who it is, but I'm not buying into it at all. Nori's a kind of okay character, but everyone else I don't give two shits about. I won't care if they die. I don't care if they've got some big influence on the plot later on down the line. I've just not bought into their nature. I've not bought into the point, basically. But hopefully they ramp them up a little bit in later seasons, later episodes, and it becomes evident over time what they're there for. But for me right now, I think it is just, oh look, there's hobbits. You know, we're talking Tolkien, we're talking Lord of the Rings. You've got to have hobbits. You don't have to. What I would have liked to have seen is perhaps by the end of this season, or whenever we get nearer to the time, we talk about Hobbiton, we talk about Bag End, we talk about the Baggins and stuff like that. I know we're miles off of Bilbo and the Ring and everything else, but just a little nod to it, just a little sniff of it. And the only way I could see this story being truly redeemed, and it may well go this way, and I've just actually thought of it myself, is if the Harfoots move into this place called the Grove, and they're taking the stranger with them, is if it ends up to be that the Harfoots are the very first hobbits, and they are the first ones that build the Shire, Hobbiton, all that kind of stuff, and the stranger is Gandalf. And as we know, Gandalf is very, very fond of hobbits. It's what Saruman mocks Gandalf for in the Fellowship of the Ring. He says, your faith for the halfling's leaf has made you blind, and you've not seen that the ring's been there all that time. That is the only way I can see this being redeemed, is that the Harfoots are descendants of Frodo, Bilbo, long ancestors, basically. And we, at the end of this series or the end of the seasons, it hints that the Grove becomes the Shire, maybe. I don't know. And if the stranger is Gandalf, it will all make sense, and I'll be happier with it then. But even so, I think their characters in this show, and I think the writing that they've got, their dialogue, their character arcs, doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't fit. And I don't feel excited about them. I don't think, oh yeah, you know, we're going to see some more fun with the hobbits. I don't care. I don't really give a shit. Whereas in The Lord of the Rings, the hobbits were the centre focus. They were the main characters, and it just worked. Everything was a branch of Frodo, Bilbo. It all linked back to the Fellowship, and it all linked back to the friendship between Merry and Pippin, between Sam and Frodo, and just the four hobbits generally. So I don't know. They might change it, but as it stands, I'm not keen on it. So anyway, we get a scene with the Harfoots. They have a heart-to-heart with each other. They're talking about moving to the Grove because things are becoming more and more dangerous. Nori is sneaking around, and her friend says to her, I think it's her friend, it might be her sister, says, if you go after that book, Dad's not going to be happy, or so-and-so's not going to be happy, the elder. And she says, I need to find this book. The stranger needs it, and it will help him find where the stars are, which she keeps going on about stars. The map then catches fire, and this is the one point where I initially thought the stranger was Gandalf, and I still do a little bit, but this is the point where I'm starting to feel that it is more so Gandalf now. Few reasons. First of all, he came in fire, it was a meteor and stuff like that, which is not canon to how the wizards arrive, the Astari arrive in Middle-earth. But as we know and as we've seen, Galadriel's character is completely not how she is in the books. So they could write them in slightly differently. Gandalf could fall from the sky, sent from the Valar to help the fight against Sauron. And then we might see glimpses of Saruman later on. We might see the Blue Wizards later on, Radagast. We might see them appear in different ways. Gandalf just might be the one that fell from the sky, that's embedded in fire, led there caught up with a ring of fire around him, because he ends up with the ring of fire. He ends up with the fire ring Nenya, which is given to him essentially through Círdan the shipwright. So you remember when he's fighting the Balrog and he says, I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder with the frame of Arnor, all that kind of stuff. He's not talking about you know, being a literal being of fire, but he wields the ring of fire. He talks about the light of fire, so the light of the Valar basically, and Eru Ilúvatar, who is God. So it's kind of leaning towards that. The only thing that put me off of it being Gandalf is that the fireflies die. So when he uses the fireflies in the last episode, to create what he was trying to show Nori, they die off. And as we know, Gandalf is a wizard who spends a lot of time with animals. He cares for animals. He has a way of communicating with them. So maybe it was just a mistake. I don't know. They might explain it later on. But that was the only thing that put me off of it. And then I thought maybe it's Sauron. Maybe Sauron is just showing himself in one of his many forms that we know he can be. And the whole fire. And when Nori goes near Gandalf, she gets a quick glimpse of the brand of Sauron. Now, it instantly makes you think it's Sauron because you see that straight away. She sees visions of Barad-dûr and stuff like that. But then I'm thinking, is it Gandalf? And is he trying to show her what he's there to do? I.e., he's going to give her the vision of Barad-dûr and say, this is the threat, this is what's going to happen, I'm here to help. But he can't quite communicate it well enough yet. I don't know. Because you've got to remember, when Gandalf first comes to Middle-earth as a Maya, he is not as seasoned, sort of intelligent and stuff as he is when we see him later on in Lord of the Rings, where he becomes Gandalf the White. And that's purely because he's just come from the source of light. He's very much still trying to find his feet with language. He's still trying to find his feet with the living, breathing world. He is essentially an angel. He's someone that's come over from the Undying Lands to try and fight Sauron and help the beings of Middle-earth fight the threat that's to come. So could be Gandalf, it could be Sauron. I'm 50-50 at the minute, guys, but I'm still leaning ever so slightly towards it being Sauron. Still nothing more hinted at in this episode other than we see the map. He understands the signs and the map catches fire, basically. He then has a little clumsy episode where the map sort of gets lit alight and then he falls over and then the tent collapses on him. It's supposed to be funny, it's not really, but again, the hint here, I instantly thought of, oh my god, remember when Gandalf visits Bag End, both in The Hobbit and Fellowship of the Ring? He hits his head both on the beam and on the chandelier. So Gandalf's not, he's very, very powerful, he's very, very intelligent, but he's also got a very base human level to him in the sense that he's clumsy, he's prone to sometimes making mistakes, he's prone to being a bit rash, and all that kind of thing. So when he did that and that sort of tent structure fell on him and it just showed him to be a little bit clumsy, I'm sat there thinking there's comedy to this now. This can't be Sauron, you know. Sauron would not, unless it's the absolute 100% god tier level of deceit. I can't see them writing in Sauron like this because this screams comedy. This screams, there's a softness to this giant. They keep calling him the giant and the stranger, and there's a softness to this guy that we haven't yet completely seen. There's an innocence to him almost. And this is why I'm thinking, is it Gandalf? And this episode absolutely makes you feel that it is Gandalf, so who knows. But anyway, back to what actually happens. I went off on a bit of a tangent there, guys, but can you tell I'm a fan? So Nori talks about the book, catches fire, tent falls on him, and this is when I had a moment I thought, maybe Gandalf, maybe not, who knows. Galadriel hands a scroll to Halbrand, and this is the scene where I mentioned earlier where she says, I know you're the king of the Southlands. You could unite all the people, and we can stand against Sauron right now if you do what needs to be done. Go back to the Southlands, claim your place as king, and bring everybody together, basically. Mirrors Aragorn's story perfectly, and he kind of says, no, I'm not doing that. You know, it's my kin are the reason why Morgoth and Sauron had the force that they did. And Galadriel kind of says, if you go to Middle-earth with me, we can reclaim our bloodlines, we can wipe the slate clean. And they basically talk about the errors that their kin have made in the past. Galadriel says, you know, we've done this, and then Halbrand says, well, you know, it's our fault that Morgoth got the power that he did. And then Galadriel says, yeah, but it was my kin's fault that the war started in the first place. So they're kind of trying to complement each other through the mistakes of their ancestors in a weird way. But it kind of works out. And she says, you know, if we go to Middle-earth, we can get help, we can reclaim an army. Because Halbrand mentions that even if he went back to unite his people, he wouldn't have enough to stand against Sauron. And then Galadriel says, well, but I know a few people. If you come with me, we can come back with some badasses. So she's obviously talking about the Noldor army, i.e. Gil-galad and Elrond. So cannot wait to see how that unfolds. We then get a very quick scene where the Queen of Númenor is speaking to her father. We don't actually see who her father is, but she says, "Father, the moment's come that we feared, the elf is here." And then we cut to the Harfoots again, where they're moving the caravan along. It's quite a brief scene, but the caravan breaks down, and they've been sort of demoted to the back of the caravan, and they're moving along with the other hobbits. And basically, the stranger gets out of the caravan because one of the hobbits is struggling and pulling it. And then the stranger says, "Friend." And then Nori says, "Look, we could take him with us. What do you say? He's kind. He's going to help us move the caravan now." And they reluctantly agree. So again, a reason why I think this is Gandalf is Mines of Moria, Fellowship of the Ring. When Gandalf's trying to open the door, one of the riddles to open the door is "Speak, friend, and enter." And he goes through all the languages that he can think of. And it's actually Frodo that comes up with the answer in the movie, and he says, "What's the Elvish word for friends?" And then Gandalf says "Melon," and then it opens. So is this a very, very early snip Easter egg, a very quick hint that this is Gandalf? He says "friend," and then I instantly thought, Gandalf, you know, that's the word that you struggle to find. So is this just a nod because in the beginning he can't speak? One of his very first words that he says to these hobbit folk is "friend," and is that something that stays with him forever, because we know what he evolves into, his relationship with the hobbits, but also he struggles to remember what friend is in Elvish to open the door. We then cut to Arondir, who does some crazy John Wick shit against the orcs. He basically says, "I'm going to bust out now." He follows up the elf friend's plan. He's all in chains, and then he kind of convinces his mates, the slaves that he's with, to fight against the orcs and break out of there. Some of them manage to get away, but as they get to the ridge, they just get picked off with arrows. There's a really shit scene where I didn't like it personally, where the slaves, along with Arondir, are obviously chained up, and the orcs have got the other side, almost like on a lead. And they kind of have a tug of war match where they're just pulling each other, and it's like, what? And then there's this bit where Arondir breaks the shackle, picks up an axe, he runs along the chain, yeah, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, jumps in the air, carves part of the orc, but basically the structure that the orcs are stood under, the tent, the shelter, it all collapses down onto the orcs, and then they start getting crisped from the sun, because their raincoats or whatever it bloody is they're wearing, the robes, start to break away, and the sun starts hitting them, and they start sizzling. So Arondir thinks he's onto something here, and he is, but I didn't like that scene. The CGI just looked and felt really, really flat and naff. It kind of reminded me of the first episode where Galadriel's fighting the snow troll. Didn't like it. It just looked cheap. It was wire framework, and you don't need the whole jumping through the air, you know, slow motion with the axe. That's not Lord of the Rings. We need hardcore, fast-paced, good swordplay, good action, medieval-style action. And it didn't feel right to me. It felt very much like I was in a computer game, or I was watching something that wasn't Lord of the Rings. It just felt very Matrixy, very out of place, and I didn't really like that bit. But other than that, we get to see a warg. Orc shouts out, "Release the warg," and I thought, yes, here we go. We're going to see some big beasts, some tasty stuff. And the warg that comes out looks like a poodle on crack. It just doesn't look like a warg that we've seen in The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. Doesn't really look menacing. It looks deformed a little bit, and it might be intentional. It could be that this is an early version of a warg and they get a lot more powerful, a lot more mean, but the face just looked fucked up, and I didn't buy into the menacing side of it. He does have a good scene where he chews apart the first two people that run at him, and he has a good little chomp on their bodies, and it's quite gruesome. But aside from that, the warg gets smashed in with a spear, and it's the elf guy, who Arondir's friend, throws the spear, and he pierces the warg. It stops the warg going after Arondir. We then see Arondir and the elf guy clambering up the side of the ridge. They're just about to escape. Arondir sort of gets stuck, sort of halfway at chin height. He's about to pull himself up, and he sees his friend running, and he stops, and then he sort of slowly turns around towards Arondir, and you can see then that he's been littered with arrows. Drops dead. Arondir starts screaming, "No," and all that kind of stuff. Gets pulled back into the pit by the orcs. The orcs start to lay into him, and then one of them shouts, "No, we're going to take him to Adar." And then I'm like, yes, we're finally going to see Sauron. And then what we see is the next scene It's, I think, underground, or it's sort of in a tunnel space where all the orcs are stood there. Arondir is tied up right at the back of the scene, and then you sort of see the behind, the shape, the silhouette of someone that's wearing orc-ish armor. Kind of looks a bit like the Daedric armor from Skyrim. Very menacing, very cold, just basically a shadow. And they're all chanting, Adar, 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 and then they're all sort of sidestepping and bowing to him as he walks past. So you know this is someone that the orcs absolutely respect and probably are afraid of. So it has to be Sauron. The ending of this episode is we see the front view of Adar, but it's obviously from the view of Arondir, who has been beaten to a pulp. He's quite hazy and he can't quite make out what he's seeing, but we see the silhouette of what looks like an elf-like creature, elf-like man, dark hair, very, very fair features, and it looks a lot like Anatar, the Anatar version we see in the Shadow of War games. So if you've played those games, it looks very much like Anatar, i.e. Sauron. And as we know, Anatar is another name that Sauron goes by. He is the Lord of the Sea after all. So it could be that in the next episode, he sweet talks Arondir, maybe. What would be really cool is if he gets Arondir on side and he convinces him to do X, Y, Z, and then Arondir falls into shadow. Maybe even becomes the Mouth of Sauron or something. Can you imagine that? I know the Mouth of Sauron arguably is a Black Númenórean, but if he kind of buys into his service and then Arondir becomes one of the Nazgûl or something, I don't know, like something like of that nature, I thought that would be really, really cool. But it's probably not going to happen like that. Arondir's probably going to stay true to his elven roots. He's going to be a good guy and he's going to escape and he's going to tell everybody about the terrible things that he's seen. But I just thought that would be a dark, twisted, really cool ending, like how the Shadow of War games end in that nature. So yeah, we see a very faint outline of what we can soundly assume is Sauron, i.e. Adar, i.e. Anatar, i.e. this guy belongs on Game of Thrones because he's got as much names as Daenerys. Breaker of chains, and do you know what I mean? It just goes on. But very, very cool way to end the scene. Very, very cool way to end the episode. On a bit of a cliffhanger. You want to see Adar, you want to see him speak, you want to see what he's about, and really start to feel that menacing nature of Sauron. That deceiving, conniving nature of Sauron, which we are undoubtedly going to see as the season goes on. And that's where it ends. So all in all, guys, I thought it was a strong episode. I don't think it was the best, but I did like a few things about this one. The orcs, the absolutely disgusting, freakishly menacing costumes of the orcs, which is an example of you can see here. Very, very cool. I was a little bit worried at first about what the orcs in this series are going to look like, but I'm pleasantly surprised. They look horrible, they sound horrible, they got that horrible, gnarly, phlegmy type voice, and they've nailed it perfectly. So very pleased with the orcs, and I'm glad we got to spend a lot of time with the orcs in this episode. I love the gruesome scenes, the arm being snapped. I love the orc playing sort of mind games with the elves and just basically showing that they're not all stupid. Some of them are very intelligent, very menacing, and not to be trusted at all. We got that sense of power struggle there. We also saw Narsil, the legendary sword. We got to meet Elendil. We got to meet Isildur in this episode. We also moved forward with Galadriel's story arc a little bit. She's a little bit closer to going back to Middle-earth. She's now got Hellbrand on side, and she's looking to travel over, hopefully with Elendil and Isildur, and start to put a foothold in Middle-earth and get things rolling. Other than that, the things I didn't like, the Harfoots, again, not buying into it at all. As I said, the only thing that is going to redeem it for me is if the Stranger, or Meteor Man, as he's been called online, is Gandalf, and the Grove becomes the Shire, and it all ties in and it makes sense. That's the only time it's going to be acceptable. If it doesn't go anywhere near that, and they just go off and have a completely different storyline, I don't know what Nori's part in this is. I don't really know where it's going. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope they shut me up and they deliver a really fantastic story with these hobbits, but at the moment, I'm not enjoying it. Other than that, there was some really poor CGI in this episode, some really great. The panning shot of Númenor, the orcs, some of the battle scenes, the warg scenes weren't too bad, but the bit where Arondir jumps along that chain and just hacks down the tent, it makes no sense in terms of physics. I know elves are nimble, before any of you come at me, but for fuck's sake, it just didn't look right. So some of the CGI was a bit crap. There was also some pointless dialogue between the Queen. I know they were trying to build up some tension between her and Galadriel and potentially Elendil as well. But I didn't really like the Queen's introduction. She could have been a little bit more present. She could have been a little bit more menacing. Came across as a little bit more of a threat, but to me she was just an annoyance that needed to be wiped out. I didn't get the sense that she was someone that was ruling one of the last high kingdoms in the world. I didn't get that at all, and I don't think you guys did either. So other than that, it was okay. It was okay. As I said, really liked Elendil and Isildur's scenes. Didn't mind Galadriel's scenes in this one. She feels like she's becoming more and more towards the Galadriel that we know, but we'll wait and see where that goes. I'm still holding out a little bit of a reserve on it. I'm scared they're going to fuck it up, and I'm scared it's going to be rushed. But all in all, I loved the Numenor scenes. I loved that panning shot. I loved what looked like the River Anduin as we went into Numenor and we saw the massive statues and the scale of it. And Adar. I love the secretness of Adar. I love the sort of the shadowy aspects of it. We know it's Sauron, but I like how it ended. It was a strong end to the episode. I just hope they don't mess up Arondir as well. He's a brand new character to the show. He's got an okay storyline so far, but I think they could really do some serious stuff with it. I think there's potential there for his character, so hopefully they don't ruin it. So if I was to rate this one, guys, it's a solid 7 out of 10. It would have got higher if the CGI in certain scenes weren't as bad. We could have tightened up some of the dialogue, and I think some of the scenes were just lackluster. We needed a little bit more oomph, either in character presence, action, or a blend of the two. I still don't buy into Galadriel. I still don't, even though she's the main character. The actress is fantastic. The acting itself is fantastic. I just don't like the way that the character's being written in. She's been written in as reckless, stupid, bold, making silly decisions, and I get they're trying to put across passion in that storyline and the reason why they're writing her that way. But there's other ways to do it, and I don't think this is the right way. I might be wrong, but we'll see where it goes. So it's a 7 out of 10 for me, guys. If you have watched the episode, let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with my score, or do you think I'm being a bit harsh? What did you like and what didn't you like about this episode? And what are your thoughts on the Meteor Man, i.e. the Stranger? What is your bet? Who is it? Saruman, Gandalf, Sauron? It could be a Maya. I've heard a really interesting theory that some people think it's a monster form of a Balrog. So as we know, the Balrogs are Maya spirits, exactly the same as Gandalf, and this is a human Balrog before it becomes Balrog. So Durin's in this as well, or one of the Durins. Who knows? It could become Durin's Bane, fire, flame from the ash. Who knows? Who knows? I love the theories on it, and I hope this goes on a little bit longer. I would imagine by the end of the first season we're going to know who the Stranger is, I would like to think. My money's still on it being Sauron, but this episode has really, really swayed me towards Gandalf. I didn't think it was Gandalf by episode 2, but by this one I'm like, this is all pointing towards Gandalf. Who knows? So let me know in the comments who you think it is, guys, as well. Until next week, until episode 4, stay tuned, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you for checking out the video.